Before we begin tonight's story, if you're enjoying these accounts from tribal law enforcement across America, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps us continue bringing you these incredible true stories. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's get into what happened at Standing Rock in October of 2016. They call me Thomas Runs with Horses, and I need to tell you about that infamous night I thought would never end. I work as a police officer for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and the incident I'm about to describe took place just outside the reservation boundaries on Highway 186. I know exactly how this will be perceived. I know you'll think I'm lying, or that I'm crazy, or both. But every word is true, and I have solid evidence to prove it. Though, when dealing with something that shouldn't exist, evidence doesn't mean much. It was October 27, 2016. If you remember that time, you know what was happening at Standing Rock. The Dakota Access Pipeline protests were at their peak. Thousands of water protectors had gathered, camping on the land, standing against the pipeline that threatened our water supply and sacred sites. The tension was thick enough to taste. National Guard, federal agents, out-of-state police, all converging on our small community. As tribal officers, we were caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace while watching our own people get pepper sprayed and arrested for protecting the land. I'd been on the force for 12 years by then. I grew up on Standing Rock, left for college, came back to serve my community. My wife Skylar and I had an 8-year-old son, Michael. Good kid, smart, already talking about becoming a water protector like his grandfather. That October, I was working extra shifts. The situation with the pipeline meant more traffic, more tension, more need for tribal law enforcement presence. On the evening of October 27th, my supervisor asked me to set up a routine DUI checkpoint on Highway 1806. Nothing unusual about that. We'd been running checkpoints regularly, partly for safety, partly to show a visible tribal police presence. The location was about 3 miles south of the main protest camps, a straight stretch of highway with good visibility in both directions. I set up around 8 p.m. Standard procedure: traffic cones, portable lights, reflective vest, clipboard. My patrol unit parked perpendicular to the road, light bar flashing. It was cold that night, temperature dropping fast once the sun went down. I had my thermos of coffee and a portable heater in the unit for breaks. The sky was clear, stars beginning to appear, and Highway 1806 stretched out in both directions like a ribbon of asphalt through the darkness. The first hour was routine. I stopped maybe 8 vehicles, a few locals heading home from work, a couple of trucks with out-of-state plates that I watched carefully but had no reason to detain. Everyone was cooperative. Some knew me, waved as they passed through. Others were wary, eyes darting to the protest camps in the distance, but they answered my questions and continued on their way. Around 9:15 p.m., I stopped a white Chevy Silverado, maybe 2010 model. South Dakota plates. The driver rolled down his window as I approached, already reaching for his license and registration. He looked to be in his mid-50s, gray hair, weathered face, wearing a Carhartt jacket. "Evening, sir," I said. "This is a routine checkpoint. Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, officer. Heading home from Bismarck. Just got off work." "License and registration, please." He handed them over. James Whitehorse, age 54, address in McLaughlin. Everything looked legitimate. I ran the license through my system. Clean record, no warrants. "You're all set, Mr. Whitehorse. Drive safely." "Thank you, officer." He pulled away, and I logged the stop on my clipboard. Vehicle number 9. Time, 9:17 p.m. White Silverado, SD plates 4BRK529. Nothing remarkable. I stopped 3 more vehicles over the next 40 minutes. All routine. Around 10 p.m., I was thinking about taking a break, warming up in the patrol unit with some coffee, when I saw headlights approaching from the south, another white Silverado. I stepped into the lane and signaled for it to stop. As it pulled up, something felt off. The truck looked familiar. Same model, same color. As the driver rolled down the window, I felt a jolt of recognition. James Whitehorse. Same man I'd stopped less than an hour ago. "Mr. Whitehorse," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We meet again." He looked at me, confused. "I'm sorry, officer. Have we met?" "I stopped you about 45 minutes ago. Same checkpoint." His confusion deepened. "No, sir. I haven't been through any checkpoint tonight. I'm coming from Bismarck, just got off work." I felt a prickle of unease. Maybe he'd forgotten, though that seemed unlikely, given how recently it had been. "License and registration, please." He handed them over. Same name, same address, same license number. But when I looked at the license photo, something was different. The man in front of me looked older. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes. I glanced at the birth date. If this was accurate, he was 54 years old, the same age as 45 minutes ago. "Mr. Whitehorse, you're certain you haven't passed through this checkpoint tonight?" "Positive, officer. This is my first time seeing you." I walked to the back of the truck and checked the license plate. 4BRK529, same plate. But the truck itself looked different. Older, more wear on the paint, a dent in the rear bumper I didn't remember seeing before. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine check. Please step out." He complied, looking nervous now. As he stood under the portable lights, I got a better look at him. Definitely older than the first time. Not drastically, but noticeably. And his jacket was different. Still Carhartt, but more worn, the color faded. "Mr. Whitehorse, you said you just got off work in Bismarck." "That's right." "What time did you leave?" "Around 8:45. Takes about half an hour to get home." "And you're sure you haven't stopped anywhere else? Haven't passed through this checkpoint?" "Officer, I don't know what this is about, but I'm telling you the truth. I left work, got on Highway 1, 806, and this is the first time I've been stopped." I walked back to my patrol unit and checked my dashcam footage. Fast-forwarded to 9:17 p.m. There it was, white Silverado, plate 4BRK529, James Whitehorse. I watched myself conduct the stop, check his license, send him on his way. Then I pulled up the current footage. 10:03 p.m. Same truck, same plate, same man, but older. I checked the truck's odometer through the window. 127,483 miles. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd taken of the first stop's paperwork. Vehicle odometer 77,219 miles. 50,000 miles difference. In 45 minutes. My hands started shaking. This wasn't possible. This wasn't possible. I walked back to James Whitehorse, who was standing by his truck, looking increasingly worried. "Mr. Whitehorse, I need you to answer something honestly. What year is it?" He stared at me. "What year? It's 2016. October 27th, 2016. "And what year were you born?" 1962. "Why? Officer, what's going on?" I did the math. Born 1962, currently 2016. He should be 54 years old, which matched his license. But the man I'd stopped at 9:17 had been 54 years old too, in 2016. Mr. Whitehorse, I know this is going to sound strange, but I need you to think carefully. Have you ever been through this checkpoint before? Maybe a long time ago?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face changed. "Actually, yeah. Years ago, back in the 90s. There was a checkpoint right around here, same setup. I remember because it was the same night the—" Wait. He looked at me more closely, his face going pale. "You're the same officer." "Excuse me?" "The officer who stopped me back in the 90s. Same face, same voice. I remember thinking it was weird that a tribal officer looked so young. But that was—" He trailed off, calculating. "That was 1996, 20 years ago. You should be older," I finished. We stared at each other in the cold October night, both of us trying to understand something that defied logic. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "How are you the same age as 20 years ago? I don't know, but I stopped you less than an hour ago. And then you showed up again, older, saying this is your first time through. This is insane. This is absolutely insane." I checked my watch. 10:12 p.m. I'd been at this checkpoint for just over 2 hours. "Mr. Whitehorse, I need you to do something for me. I need you to drive north for exactly 1 mile, turn around, and come back through this checkpoint. Can you do that?" "Why? What's going to happen?" "I don't know, but I need to see." He looked terrified, but he nodded. "Okay, 1 mile north, turn around, come back. Thank you." He got in his truck and drove away, taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood there watching, waiting. My radio crackled with routine chatter from other units, but I couldn't focus on it. All I could think about was those 50,000 miles, 20 years of aging in 45 minutes. 12 minutes later, I saw headlights approaching from the north. White Silverado, plate 4BRK529. It pulled up to the checkpoint, and I walked to the driver's window. The man inside was old, easily in his 70s, maybe older. White hair, deeply lined face, hands gnarled with arthritis gripping the steering wheel, but it was still James Whitehorse. He looked at me with eyes full of fear and confusion. "Officer," he said, his voice thin and wavering, "I don't understand. I just turned around. It's been maybe 5 minutes, but I feel—" I looked in the mirror and— He held up his hands, staring at them like they belonged to someone else. "What's happening to me?" I couldn't answer. I had no answer. I checked the odometer. 184,927 miles. Another 60,000 miles in 12 minutes. "Mr. Whitehorse, stay in your vehicle. I'm calling for backup." "How long has it been? For you, how long since I left?" 12 minutes. For me, it feels like I've been driving for years. Decades. I remember the road, the same road, over and over. The same mile, forward and back, forward and back. But it was years. I know it was years. He started crying, quiet tears running down his weathered face. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, Officer Runs with Horses. I need immediate backup at my location, Highway 1806, mile marker 32. I have a situation I can't explain." "Copy, Unit 7. Nature of the situation?" Just send backup, send everyone." I stayed with James Whitehorse while we waited. He sat in his truck, aging before my eyes, though more slowly now. Every few minutes, another line would appear on his face. His hands would grow a little more gnarled. "There's something wrong with this place," he said. "Something wrong with this road. I've been here before. I keep coming back. I think I've been coming back for decades and I never knew. Every time I pass through, I lose years, and I don't even know it." When did you first come through here? The first time you remember? 1996. October 27th, 1996. Same date as tonight. I was driving home from work and there was a checkpoint. A young officer stopped me. You stopped me. And now it's 2016, but you haven't aged a day, and I've aged 40 years in 2 hours. I felt cold terror settling into my bones. October 27th, 1996. 20 years ago exactly, I would have been 16 years old in high school, nowhere near a police uniform. But according to James Whitehorse, I'd stopped him at this exact location 20 years ago. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. 2 tribal units and a supervisor, Sergeant Miller. I explained what had happened, showed them the dashcam footage, showed them James Whitehorse's rapidly aging form. Miller looked at the evidence, looked at the man, looked at me. This is impossible, Thomas. I know. Dash cams can be manipulated. I didn't manipulate anything. You can check the system. This is real. Then how do you explain it? I can't. We called for medical assistance. The ambulance took James Whitehorse to the Tribal Health Center in Fort Yates. He was classified as elderly, suffering from rapid onset dementia and physical deterioration. No one had an explanation. No one wanted to admit what had really happened. Sergeant Miller shut down the checkpoint at midnight and sent me home. But as I was packing up the equipment, I saw headlights approaching from the south. A white Silverado, plate 4 BRK 529. No, I said out loud. No, no, no. The truck pulled up to the checkpoint, which was no longer officially active. I walked to the driver's window automatically, my body moving on instinct even as my mind screamed at me to run. The window rolled down. James Whitehorse looked at me. Mid-50s, gray hair, weathered face, Carhartt jacket. "Evening, officer," he said. "This a checkpoint? I haven't had anything to drink." I stared at him. "Mr. Whitehorse?" "Yes, sir. James Whitehorse. Is there a problem?" "What's the date?" "October 27th, 2016. "What time did you leave work?" "Around 8:45. "Why?" It was starting over. The loop was starting over. Sergeant Miller walked up behind me. "Thomas, what are you doing? The checkpoint is closed." "Sarge, this is the same driver, the same man from tonight. He's back." "That's impossible. We just sent him to the hospital." "Check the plate. 4 BRK 529. Miller checked. His face went pale. That's the same plate." James Whitehorse looked between us, confused. "Officers, I don't understand. Is there a problem? Can I go home?" Miller pulled me aside. "What the hell is happening here?" "I don't know. But I think this checkpoint is doing something. Something to time, to the people who pass through. And I think it's been happening for a long time." "How long?" 20 years. Maybe longer." Miller looked at the truck, at the confused driver, at the empty highway stretching into the darkness. "Shut it down," he said. "Completely. No more checkpoints at this location. Ever." "It might be too late for that." "What do you mean?" I pointed at my patrol unit. On the hood, partially obscured by the light bar, was a dent I didn't remember. And the unit number on the door was different. Not by much, just 1 digit, but different. And when I looked at my reflection in the side mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I looked younger. Not drastically, but noticeably. Like I'd lost a few years, or like I'd been here longer than I thought. "Sarge," I said quietly, "what year did I join the force?" 2004, 12 years ago. "Why? And how old am I?" 36. "Thomas, why are you asking me this?" "Because I don't remember. I don't remember how long I've been doing this, and I don't think it's been 12 years. I looked at the highway, at the checkpoint markers, at the spot where I'd been standing for the past 4 hours. Or had it been 4 hours? Had it been years, decades? How long had I been here, stopping cars, sending them into the loop, watching them age and return over and over? And how many times had I set up this checkpoint before tonight? In the distance, I saw more headlights approaching. Another white Silverado. "Sarge," I said, my voice shaking, "I don't think we can shut it down. I don't think it's ever been shut down. I think we've been here before. I think we've had this conversation before. And I think we're going to have it again." "That's insane." "Is it? Then explain the truck, explain the driver, explain why I can't remember when I started this shift." Sergeant Miller opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out, because he couldn't explain it. None of us could. The white Silverado pulled up to the checkpoint. James Whitehorse rolled down his window. "Evening, officer. This a checkpoint?" And I realized something that made everything so much worse. I'd said those exact words before. Not James. Me. I'd been the driver too. Somewhere, in some version of this loop, I was the one in the truck, aging rapidly, returning over and over, trapped in a cycle I couldn't escape. The checkpoint wasn't something I was operating. It was something I was trapped in. And I had been for a very, very long time. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. Sergeant Miller tried to order me off duty, told me I needed rest, told me the checkpoint was officially closed and I should let it go. But I couldn't leave. Something was keeping me there, some pull I couldn't quite define. Like the checkpoint itself had gravity. We let James Whitehorse go. What else could we do? He drove away into the darkness, and I watched his taillights disappear, wondering if he'd loop back around, wondering how many times he'd already made this journey without knowing it. Miller stayed with me until about 2 a.m., then exhaustion got the better of him. "I'm going back to the station," he said. "You should too. We'll figure this out in the morning." "What if there is no morning? What if tomorrow is just tonight again?" He looked at me with something between concern and fear. "Thomas, you're starting to scare me. Get some rest. That's an order." But after he left, I stayed. I sat in my patrol unit with the engine running for heat, the light bar dark now, no longer an active checkpoint. Just me and the highway and the cold October night. I started going through my unit's logs, looking for something that might make sense. Maintenance records, shift reports, anything that could tell me how long I'd actually been doing this job. The official record said I'd joined the force in 2004, 12 years ago. But when I tried to remember specific details from those early years, I couldn't. The memories were there, but they felt thin, like copies of copies. Around 3 a.m., I pulled out my personal phone and called Skylar. It went to voicemail. I tried again. Still voicemail. I looked at the time. 3:17 a.m. She'd be asleep, of course. So why did I feel such dread at not reaching her? I scrolled through my phone's photo gallery. Pictures of Skylar, of Michael, of family gatherings and birthdays. But as I looked at them, I noticed something strange. The dates were wrong. Photos that I remembered as recent were time-stamped from years ago. And photos I didn't remember at all were dated as recent. There was one photo in particular that stopped me cold. Me in my tribal police uniform, standing at a checkpoint. Same portable lights, same setup. The timestamp said October 27th, 2006, exactly 10 years ago. Same date as tonight. I zoomed in on the photo. Behind me, in the background, I could see a patrol unit. The number on the door was partially visible. Unit 7, my unit. But in the photo, I looked younger, noticeably younger. Like I'd lost 10 years, or gained them back. I was staring at the photo when I saw headlights approaching from the south. Against my better judgment, against every instinct telling me to drive away, I got out of my unit and stood on the shoulder, watching. A tribal police vehicle approached. Same model as mine, but the paint scheme was slightly different. Older. The kind we'd used back in the 90s. It pulled to a stop about 50 yards away, and a figure got out. Another officer, in uniform, walking toward me. As he got closer, I felt reality tilt on its axis. He was me. Not similar. Not a relative. Me. Exactly me. Same face, same build, same walk. But younger. Late 20s, maybe. The age I'd been when I first joined the force. He stopped about 10 feet away, studying me with the same shock I was feeling. "You're me," he said. "And you're me." My voice sounded distant, unreal. "What year is it for you?" he asked. 2016, October 27th. 2006 for me, same date. He looked at the spot where the checkpoint had been. "You set it up here too." "Too?" "I set up a checkpoint here tonight. Had some strange encounters. A driver who kept looping back, aging each time. I thought I was going crazy." James Whitehorse. His eyes widened. "You know him?" "I stopped him too. Same thing happened. He's trapped in some kind of loop, aging every time he passes through." The younger me looked shaken. I called for backup. My sergeant came, told me to shut it down and go home. But I couldn't leave. Something kept pulling me back. I know. I feel it too. We stood there in silence. Two versions of the same person, separated by 10 years, but standing in the same moment. "How is this possible?" he finally asked. "I don't know, but I think the checkpoint is doing something. Creating loops, temporal distortions. Every time we set it up here, it happens again." "Then why do we keep setting it up? If this happened to you in 2006, why did you do it again in 2016? That was the question, wasn't it? Why had I set up the checkpoint in exactly the same place, on exactly the same date, when some part of me had to know what would happen? "I don't remember," I admitted. "I remember tonight clearly. But 2006, it's fuzzy. I remember the job, remember joining the force, but specific moments. They're gone, like someone erased them. Same for me. I remember 1996, but barely. Just fragments. A checkpoint, strange encounters, a feeling of unease, but no details. The year James Whitehorse said he'd first been stopped here. "We need to find out what happened in 1996, I said. "Find the officer who was here that night." "That would be us, wouldn't it?" Another version of us, 10 years younger than me. Before I could respond, we both heard it. An engine approaching. We turned to see headlights coming from the north. Another patrol unit. Same model, but even older. The light bar design was from the early 90s. It pulled up, and a third officer stepped out. He was me, even younger, early 20s. Fresh-faced, barely out of the academy. He looked at both of us, and I watched his face cycle through the same shock and confusion we'd all felt. "You're me," he said, looking at the 2006 version. "And you're me older," looking at me, the 2016 version. "What year?" 2006 me asked. 1996, October 27th. The three of us stood in a triangle, three versions of Thomas Runs with Horses, separated by decades but existing in the same moment, on the same stretch of highway, at the same checkpoint. The youngest version was shaking. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. I set up a checkpoint here tonight. Routine DUI check. Had some weird stops. Guy named Whitehorse kept coming through, aging each time. I thought I was losing my mind. Called my sergeant, he told me to shut it down. I left, but then, I don't know. I was driving away, and suddenly I was back here, like I never left." "We all experienced the same thing," I said. "The same checkpoint, the same date, the same driver. We're caught in some kind of temporal loop." "But why?" 2006 me asked. "Why us? Why this location?" 1996 me pulled out a worn notebook from his pocket. "I've been documenting everything tonight. Every car I stopped, every strange occurrence. Look at this." He showed us his log. The list of vehicles was identical to mine. Same makes, same models, same license plates, same times. We'd all stopped the same cars, in the same order, experiencing the same impossible events. "We're not just in a loop," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "We're all in the same loop, experienced at different points. The checkpoint creates a temporal convergence. Everyone who passes through exists in multiple timelines simultaneously." "Then, where's the version of us from 1986? 2006 me asked. "And 1976. If this pattern goes back further, there should be more of us." As if in answer, we heard another engine, then another, then another. Over the next 10 minutes, they arrived. More patrol units, more versions of me, each one younger than the last. 1986 me, looking barely old enough to be a cop. 1976 me, just a kid really, in an uniform that seemed too big for him. 8 versions of Thomas Runs with Horses, spanning 40 years, all standing at the same checkpoint on Highway 1806. The youngest one, 1976 me, looked terrified. "I'm a rookie. This is my first week on patrol. They sent me out here to run a checkpoint, said it would be easy, nothing ever happens on this road. But then people started looping back, and I didn't know what to do, and now all of you." He gestured helplessly at the rest of us. "How far back does this go?" I asked. 1976. That's 40 years. Is there an even older version of us out there? 1976 me shook his head. "I don't think so. I checked the records before my shift. This checkpoint location was established in 1976. Before that, this stretch of highway didn't even exist. It was built on old tribal land that year." "What was here before?" 2006 me asked. "According to the old maps, nothing. Just open prairie. But one of the elders at the station mentioned something. Said this area used to be sacred ground, a ceremonial site. The state bulldozed it in 1975 to put the highway through." Sacred ground, of course. How many times had this story played out across indigenous lands? Something sacred destroyed for a road, and the wound never healed. "So, the checkpoint sits on a desecrated ceremonial site," I said. "And every time we activate it, we create a temporal loop. The site is trying to heal itself, but we keep tearing the wound open." The oldest version of me, 2016 me, felt the weight of that knowledge. 4 decades of this. 4 decades of other versions of myself, trapped in an endless cycle, setting up the checkpoint over and over, never remembering, never learning. "We need to find out what happened to the ceremonial site," I said. "What it was used for, what was destroyed. Maybe that'll tell us how to stop this." 1986 me spoke up. "There's an elder, Daniel Blackfeather. He's been with the tribal council for years. If anyone knows the history of this land, it's him. He's still around in my time," 2006 me confirmed. "Mine too," I said. He must be in his 80s by now. We decided that I, the 2016 version, would go talk to Daniel. I was the oldest, had the most experience, and in my timeline I knew him well. But as I turned to leave, 1976 me grabbed my arm. Wait, if you leave, will you come back? Or will you forget, like we did before? None of us remember the previous loops. What if you drive away and 10 years from now you're setting up the same checkpoint, not remembering any of this? It was a valid concern. How many times had this exact scene played out? How many times had we all stood here, multiple versions of ourselves, made plans to investigate, and then forgotten everything when the loop reset? We need to leave evidence, I said. Something that can't be erased or forgotten. Something that will survive the loop. 2006 me pulled out his citation book. We all have these. What if we write down everything we know right now and leave them here? Hide them somewhere they'll be found. It was a good idea. We spent the next hour writing. 8 notebooks, 8 versions of the same events, written from 8 different perspectives. We documented the loops, James Whitehorse's aging, the temporal convergence, everything. Then we buried them, not far from the checkpoint, at the base of an old cottonwood tree that had somehow survived the highway construction. We marked the spot with a pile of stones. If we forget, I said, maybe our future selves will find these. Maybe next time we'll remember. As dawn approached, I felt the pull again. The need to leave, to resume my normal life, to forget this impossible night. I looked at the 7 other versions of myself, and I saw the same struggle in their eyes. We're going to forget, 1996 me said. Aren't we? We're going to walk away from here, and by tomorrow this will all seem like a dream. Maybe, I said. But we've left evidence, and maybe that's enough. One by one, they returned to their patrol units. One by one, they drove away into the past, back to their own timelines, carrying memories that would fade like morning mist. I was the last one left. Me, the 2016 version, standing at a checkpoint that shouldn't exist, having had a conversation with my past selves that defied every law of physics. I got in my unit and started driving toward Fort Yates, toward Daniel Blackfeather's house. But as I drove, I felt the memories slipping away, the details becoming vague. By the time I reached town, I wasn't sure why I'd stayed at the checkpoint so long or who I'd been talking to. By the time I pulled into Daniel's driveway, I'd almost forgotten the whole night. Almost, but not quite, because some part of me, deep down, remembered. And that part was screaming at me not to forget, not to let it go, not to let another cycle pass without breaking free. I knocked on Daniel's door as the sun rose over Standing Rock, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He answered, looking old and tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Thomas," he said, "I wondered when you'd come. You know about the checkpoint. I know about many things. Come inside. We need to talk about what you've forgotten." And as I stepped into his house, I felt the weight of 40 years of loops pressing down on me, and I knew that whatever Daniel was about to tell me, it would change everything, or it would trap me forever. Daniel Blackfeather's living room smelled of sage and old coffee. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, family members and tribal gatherings and landscapes of Standing Rock before the pipeline, before the highways, before the reservations. He moved slowly, age heavy on his bones, but his mind was clear as he settled into his chair and gestured for me to sit. "You look tired, Thomas," he said, "like you've been up for more than one night." "I have. Multiple nights, multiple versions of the same night." He nodded, unsurprised. "The checkpoint on Highway 1806. You know about it." "I've known for 40 years. since 1976 when they first put that highway through the ceremonial grounds. He reached for a photo album on the side table and opened it to a marked page. This is what that land looked like before. The photograph showed an open prairie, a circle of stones arranged in a specific pattern, prayer flags or offerings scattered around. In the center was a fire pit, cold and ancient. What was it? I asked. A threshold, a place where the membrane between worlds was thin. Our ancestors used it for vision quests, for communicating with those who had passed on. Time worked differently there. A night could last a year. A year could pass in a night. The elders who knew how to navigate that space could walk through their own past, learn from their ancestors, see the paths their choices would create. And then the highway came. Yes, in 1975, the state decided this was the perfect route for Highway 1806. Never mind that it was sacred land. Never mind that we'd protected it for generations. They bulldozed the stones, paved over the threshold, and turned a place of spiritual significance into a path for drunk drivers and commerce. He took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. But you can't just destroy a place like that. You can't pave over a threshold and expect it to disappear. The boundary between worlds was still there, under the asphalt, trying to function the way it always had. And when your department set up that first checkpoint in 1976, exactly 1 year after the destruction, it created a new kind of threshold. Not a spiritual one, but a temporal one. The checkpoint became the new threshold. Yes, the ceremonial site had been a place to walk through time consciously, with guidance and purpose. But the checkpoint does it unconsciously, chaotically. People pass through and loop back without knowing it. Time fractures, and those caught in the fracture lose pieces of themselves. James Whitehorse. He's been looping through for 20 years. Daniel's face grew sad. James isn't the only one. There are dozens of them. People who drive through that section of Highway 1806 and get caught in the temporal eddy. They age when they shouldn't, or they don't age when they should. They live the same moments over and over, and they never realize what's happening to them. But why me? Why do I keep setting up the checkpoint? 8 versions of me, spanning 40 years, all doing the exact same thing on the exact same night. Because you're the anchor. The word sent a chill through me. What does that mean? Daniel stood slowly and walked to his window, looking out at the rising sun. Every threshold needs an anchor, a fixed point that holds it open, that allows passage between the worlds or times. In the old ceremonial site, the anchor was a sacred stone, blessed by generations of medicine people. When the state destroyed that stone, the threshold needed a new anchor. And it chose me. Not just you, your bloodline, your family. Do you know who your great-great-grandfather was? I shook my head. Joseph runs with horses. He was the keeper of the threshold, the one who maintained the ceremonial site, who guided people through their vision quests, who made sure the boundary between worlds stayed strong but not too permeable. When he died in 1952, your great-grandfather took over, then your grandfather. Your family has been tied to that land for generations. But I never knew. No one told me. Because by the time you were born, the threshold was gone, paved over. Your grandfather tried to forget, to let the old ways die. He never taught your father about the threshold, and your father never taught you. The knowledge was lost. Daniel turned back to me. But the land remembered. And when you joined the tribal police in 2004, when you started patrolling that area, the threshold recognized you. It knew your blood, your lineage, and it made you its new anchor. I felt sick. So I'm trapped forever, looping through the same night, setting up the same checkpoint, creating the same temporal distortions. Unless you can close it properly, the way it should have been closed when the highway was built. How? Daniel sat back down and looked at me with ancient eyes. Every anchor has a choice. They can hold the threshold open, or they can seal it shut, but sealing it requires sacrifice. The anchor must give something of themselves to mend the wound. In the old days, the keeper would spend a night in the ceremonial circle, fasting and praying, offering their connection to the threshold in exchange for its closure. They would lose the ability to walk between worlds, but the threshold would heal. But I've been doing this for 40 years without knowing it. How do I make that choice now? You make it consciously. You go back to the checkpoint, but this time you don't just operate it. You become it. You let yourself fully anchor to that point in time and space, and then you release it. You let go of your connection to the temporal loop, and in doing so, you free everyone else caught in it. What happens to me when I do that? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. The old keepers who closed thresholds. Some of them survived, some didn't. Some became part of the threshold itself, existing between the worlds forever. There's no way to know until you try. I thought about Skylar, about Michael, about the life I'd been living without realizing I was living multiple versions of it simultaneously. What if I don't? What if I just stop going to that checkpoint, stop being a cop, walk away from it all? The loop continues. Another version of you, from another timeline, will keep setting it up, and more people like James Whitehorse will get trapped. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, some version of you will be sitting in this same chair, having this same conversation with whoever's alive to remember the threshold. So I don't really have a choice. You always have a choice, but some choices are clearer than others. I left Daniel's house as the sun climbed higher, my mind racing with the implications of what he'd told me. I drove back toward the checkpoint, not sure what I was going to do, but knowing I had to do something. As I approached the location, I saw patrol units already there. 3 of them. And standing on the shoulder were 3 versions of myself. 2006 me, 1996 me, and 1986 me. I pulled over and got out. They all turned to look at me. "You came back," 2006 me said. "So did you. I thought you'd forget." We did. But then we remembered. Something pulled us back here, like we couldn't stay away. 1996 me held up a dirt-covered notebook. We found the evidence we buried, read what we wrote. It all came flooding back. "I talked to Daniel Blackfeather," I said. "He explained what this place is, what we are." I told them everything. The threshold, the anchor, the choice we had to make. They listened in silence, and I could see the same conflict playing out on each of their faces. "So one of us has to sacrifice themselves," 1986 me said finally. "Stay here, become part of the threshold, seal it shut." "It doesn't have to be just one of us," I said. "We're all the same person, all anchored to the same point. Maybe if we all do it together, the burden is shared. Maybe we all survive. Or maybe we all disappear," 2006 me countered. "Either way, we free everyone else. James Whitehorse, all the others caught in the loop. Isn't that worth it?" 1996 me looked at the spot where the checkpoint had been. "I have a family. In my timeline, Skylar and I just got married. We're talking about having kids. If I do this, if I give myself to the threshold, do I lose that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Daniel said some keepers survived. Maybe we'll remember. Maybe we'll go back to our lives, and it'll be like this never happened. Or maybe we'll remember everything and have to live with the weight of it." We stood there, 4 versions of one man facing an impossible choice. Then 2006 me stepped forward. I'll do it. I'm already 10 years deep in this loop. I've already lost pieces of myself. At least if I do this consciously, it means something. No, I said, we all do it, together. We're all anchor points. We all share the responsibility. Over the next hour, more versions arrived. Pulled by the same force, the same need to be at this place at this moment. By noon, all 8 of us stood in a circle at the checkpoint location, 1976 me, barely out of the academy. 1986 me, young and idealistic. 1996 me, newly married. 2006 me, a father now, Michael just born. 2016 me, living through the protests, watching my son grow up. And 3 more, 2026, 2036, 2046. Future versions I hadn't met yet, but who had been pulled back to this moment by the temporal convergence. 8 versions of Thomas Runs with Horses, spanning 70 years, all gathered at the place that had trapped us. 2046, me looked old, ancient even. His voice was thin but clear. I've been carrying this burden for 70 years. In my timeline, I never figured out how to stop it. I just kept going back, kept manning the checkpoint, kept watching people loop through and age and forget. I'm tired. I want it to end. Then let's end it, I said, together. We joined hands, forming a circle around the exact spot where the checkpoint had stood. The sun was directly overhead, casting no shadows, and we began to remember. Not just the loops, not just the checkpoint. We remembered further back. We remembered our great-grandfather, our grandfather, generations of Runs with Horses men who had served as threshold keepers. We remembered the sacred stone, the ceremonial circle, the thin place where worlds touched. We remembered what we were supposed to be. The air around us began to shimmer. The asphalt beneath our feet cracked, and through the cracks I could see stone. The original ceremonial stones still there, still holding the threshold open, still waiting for a keeper to close it properly. We release you, I said, speaking for all of us. We release you from this wound. We release you from this loop. We give ourselves as the final offering, the last anchor, the seal that closes the threshold forever. The shimmer intensified. I felt myself splitting, not physically but temporally. I could feel all 8 versions of me merging and separating simultaneously, becoming one consciousness experiencing 8 different moments. And then I felt the threshold respond. It didn't speak in words, but I understood. It had been waiting for this, waiting for a keeper to come back, to acknowledge what had been destroyed, to offer themselves in exchange for healing. The stones beneath the asphalt began to glow, not with light, but with something deeper, something that existed before light. The boundary between worlds was closing, the wound was healing, and we were the catalyst. I felt myself being pulled in 8 different directions. In 1976, I was just starting this journey. In 2046, I was ending it. And in all the moments between, I was learning, experiencing, becoming what I needed to be to reach this moment. The last thing I saw before everything went white was James Whitehorse driving past. But this time, he wasn't looping. He was just driving, heading home, living his life linearly. Free. We'd done it, we'd sealed the threshold, and we'd paid the price. I woke up in my patrol unit, engine still running, parked on the shoulder of Highway 1806. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed too vivid, too real. My radio crackled with routine traffic, dispatch coordinating units across the reservation. Everything sounded normal, but nothing felt normal. Unit 7, this is dispatch, what's your status? I grabbed the handset with a hand that was shaking for reasons I couldn't quite remember. "This is Unit 7. I'm on Highway 1806, mile marker 32. What time is it?" 1847 hours. "You okay out there, Thomas? You sound disoriented." "Yeah, I'm fine. Just lost track of time." But I hadn't just lost track of time. I'd lost time itself. Or gained it. Or lived it in 8 different ways simultaneously. The memories were there, crystal clear and impossible. 8 versions of myself, standing in a circle, hands joined, offering ourselves to close a wound in reality. The white light, the sensation of being pulled apart and put back together, the feeling of merging and separating all at once. And then waking up here, alone, as if none of it had happened. Except I remembered. God help me, I remembered all of it. I checked the date on my patrol computer, October 27th, 2016. The same day I'd set up the checkpoint. Or had I? I tried to recall starting my shift, driving to this location, setting up the cones and lights. The memories felt thin, like trying to remember a dream after waking. But the memories of the loops, the other versions of myself, the threshold ceremony, those were solid and real. I sat there for a long moment, trying to understand what had happened. Had we succeeded? Had we sealed the threshold? Or was I just in another loop, another iteration of the same impossible night? The only way to know was to check. I drove back to the station in Fort Yates, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The familiar route felt strange now, like I was seeing it for the first time and the 1,000th time simultaneously. Every landmark triggered multiple memories, some of them mine, some of them belonging to the other versions of myself. When I walked into the station, Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk. His face showed the usual end-of-shift exhaustion, nothing more. No recognition of the impossible night we'd shared. No memory of shutting down a checkpoint that defied physics. "Thomas, you're here late. Thought you had the evening off." "Evening off?" I repeated. "Yeah, you switched shifts with Delgado, remember? You're not on until tomorrow night." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The timeline had changed. In this version of events, I'd never worked today, never set up the checkpoint, never started the loop that had trapped me for 40 years. Right, I forgot, just stopped by to check something. "You feeling okay? You look pale." "I'm fine, just tired." I went to the records room, my heart pounding. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights, rows of filing cabinets holding decades of patrol reports and incident logs. I pulled the files for Highway 1806, searching for checkpoint reports from mile marker 32. Found entries from 1976 when the location was first used. Routine DUI checkpoint, established by Officer T. runs with horses. Then, nothing. The next checkpoint at that location wasn't until 1982, and that was at mile marker 35, 2 miles north. For 40 years, no checkpoints had been established at mile marker 32. We'd erased it. We'd closed the loop so completely that it had never existed. But I still remembered. Every moment, every version, every choice. The weight of 8 lifetimes pressed against my consciousness, demanding to be acknowledged even though the physical evidence said they'd never happened. I spent the next 3 days in a fog, going through the motions of my life while trying to understand what I'd become. I'd go to work, patrol my assigned routes, respond to calls. I'd come home to Skylar and Michael, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed. Everything normal, everything routine. But underneath the normalcy, I carried the weight of those erased timelines. I'd catch myself responding to situations with experience I shouldn't have, making decisions based on outcomes I'd witnessed in loops that no longer existed. Skylar noticed. "You've been distant," she said one evening after Michael had gone to bed. We were sitting on the couch, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. "Ever since the protests started getting intense, you've been somewhere else. Talk to me, Thomas. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her. Wanted to explain that I'd lived 40 years in a single night, that I'd met 7 other versions of myself and we'd sacrificed our individual existences to heal a wound in time, that I remembered being younger and older simultaneously, that I carried memories from timelines that had been erased, that every time I drove past mile marker 32, I saw ghosts of myself standing eternal guard. But how do you explain something like that without sounding insane? "The job is getting to me," I said instead, which was true enough. Watching our people get arrested for protecting the water, having to maintain the peace while knowing the pipeline threatens everything. It's heavy. She took my hand. "I know, and I'm proud of you for doing it anyway, for trying to protect everyone, even when they're on different sides." She paused. "But there's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me." I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for over a decade, and I saw something that made my breath catch. In her eyes, I saw recognition, not of the specific events, but of the weight I carried. Like some part of her knew, or remembered, or understood what had been sacrificed. "If I told you I'd lived other versions of this life," I said carefully, "versions where things went differently, where choices led to different outcomes, would you believe me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Like in dreams? More real than dreams? Like actual lived experience, just in timelines that don't exist anymore? Is that even possible?" "I don't know, but I remember things that never happened. I remember being a rookie cop in 1976, being a new father in 2006, being an old man in 2046. All of it feels as real as this moment right now." Skylar looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear? Concern? Or something else? "My grandmother used to talk about thin places," she said finally. "Places where the boundary between worlds is permeable. She said some people can walk between them, see what was and what might be. She said it was a gift, but also a burden, because once you see the other paths, you can never fully commit to just one. That's what it feels like I'm living one life but remembering 8. Then maybe that's what you're supposed to do. Maybe that's the gift. You get to know what the other choices would have led to, and use that knowledge to make better decisions in this life." I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd been so focused on the loss, the sacrifice, the weight of carrying multiple timelines that I hadn't considered it might be a gift, a way of knowing the consequences of my choices before I made them. "What if the other versions of me are still out there?" I asked. "What if they're trapped somewhere, holding things together while I get to live free?" "Then you live well enough to honor their sacrifice. That's all any of us can do when someone gives up something so we can have more." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. The next morning, I drove to mile marker 32. It was a Saturday, my day off, and Skylar thought I was just going for a drive to clear my head. Not entirely untrue. The highway was quiet, just occasional traffic heading north toward Bismarck or south toward Mobridge. I pulled onto the shoulder at the exact spot where the checkpoint had been. Where it still was, in some way I couldn't quite define. I got out of my personal vehicle and walked to the edge of the asphalt. The prairie grass was tall here, moving in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky was vast and empty, that particular shade of blue you only get on the Great Plains. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unmarked by the impossible events that had unfolded here. But when I looked with eyes that remembered 8 lifetimes, I could see them. Faint, translucent, like heat shimmer or mirage. 8 figures standing in a circle, hands joined, heads bowed. They weren't quite there, but they weren't quite gone either. Existing in a state between presence and absence, holding the seal we'd created. I walked closer. The figures didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. They just stood in their eternal vigil, keeping the threshold closed, keeping time flowing properly, making sure no one else would be caught in the loops that had trapped James Whitehorse and countless others. I could identify each one now that I knew what to look for. The youngest, 1976 me, barely more than a kid, scared but determined. The middle versions, growing older and wiser with each decade. And the oldest, 2046 ME, ancient and tired but at peace with the choice he'd made. 7 versions of myself, sacrificed so that one could continue, so that I could continue. Why me? I asked out loud, not expecting an answer. Why did I get to leave when you had to stay? The wind picked up, rustling the grass, and I heard something that might have been words, or might have been my imagination. Because your timeline is the spine, the central axis that all the others branched from. We're echoes, possibilities, might-have-beens. You're the original. You deserve to see it through. I don't feel original. I feel like I'm missing 7/8 of myself. You're not missing us. We're inside you. Every experience, every choice, every moment we lived is part of your memory now. We didn't disappear. We merged. Most of us anyway. I looked at the circle again and realized something I'd missed before. There were only 7 figures. One position was empty. The 2016 version, the one I'd been on the night of the ceremony, wasn't standing in the circle. Because I'd been the one allowed to leave. The one who'd woken up in the patrol car, who'd returned to normal life, who carried the memories but wasn't bound by the anchor. How long do you have to stay here? I asked, until the debt is paid, until each of us has merged back. Every 10 years on October 27th, one of us returns to you. Becomes part of you fully, not just in memory, but in essence. In 2026, the youngest will merge. In 2036, the next. By 2046, all 8 will be one again, and the anchor will be complete. The threshold will be permanently sealed, and we can all finally rest. 30 years. I had 30 years to carry this burden, to remember what had been sacrificed, to live well enough to honor 7 versions of myself who'd given up their existence. What happens if I die before 2046? If something happens to me, do you stay trapped forever? The anchor isn't your physical body. It's your consciousness, your essence. As long as some version of Thomas runs with horses exists in this timeline, the anchor holds. If you die, the merging happens all at once. We all return at the moment of your death, and whatever comes next, we face it together. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The idea of dying and suddenly having 7 other versions of myself crowding into my consciousness at the moment of death seemed like its own kind of hell. Is there anyone else who can see you? Anyone else who knows what happened? The old keeper, Daniel Blackfeather. He walks between worlds too, and there will be others. People sensitive to the thin places who can feel the boundary between what is and what might have been. They'll see us, they'll know, and maybe, if we're lucky, they'll understand what we did and why. I stood there for a long time, watching the 7 figures hold their eternal circle, feeling the weight of their sacrifice and my survival. Eventually, I got back in my vehicle and drove away, but I knew I'd be back. On October 27th, 2026, to witness the first merging, the first return of a lost part of myself. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. The Dakota Access Pipeline protest continued through the winter, reaching a fever pitch as water protectors dug in against the cold and the militarized police presence. I worked extra shifts, trying to keep the peace, trying to protect everyone involved even when they saw each other as enemies. In December, the Army Corps of Engineers denied the easement. The pipeline would have to be rerouted. The water protectors celebrated, and I celebrated with them, but quietly, aware that the victory was temporary, that the larger battle for sovereignty and sacred lands would continue long after the camps disbanded. I thought about the threshold often during those months, about how it had been a place for walking through time, for learning from the past, for seeing the consequences of choices before making them, and about how we'd destroyed that place, paved it over, turned it into a trap, and then sacrificed ourselves to heal it. There was a lesson in there somewhere, about the cost of progress, about the wounds we create when we ignore the sacred, about how healing those wounds requires sacrifice from those willing to stand in the gap. I started visiting Daniel Blackfeather regularly. He was old now, in his late 80s, but his mind remained sharp. We'd sit in his living room, drinking coffee, talking about the threshold, about the ceremony, about what it meant to be an anchor. "You did something remarkable," he said during one of these visits, "something that hasn't been done in generations. You closed a threshold properly, with intention and sacrifice. The old keepers would be proud." I don't feel proud, I feel guilty, like I took the easy way out while 7 other versions of me paid the price. You all paid the price. They paid with their individual existences. You paid with the knowledge that you survived when they didn't, and with the burden of carrying their memories. Neither price is easier than the other. Will it ever feel normal again? Will I ever stop seeing them when I drive past that spot? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "No, but you'll get used to it. The weight becomes familiar. You learn to carry it without letting it crush you. That's what it means to be a keeper. You hold the boundary, and the boundary holds you." I don't want to be a keeper. I just want to be a cop, a husband, a father. Normal things. Then be those things. Being an anchor doesn't exclude you from normal life. It just adds another layer to it. You're not the first person in your family to carry this burden, and you won't be the last. That stopped me. "What do you mean?" "Michael, your son. He has the bloodline too. When you're gone, the responsibility might pass to him. Not necessarily as an anchor, but as someone aware of the thin places. Someone who can walk between worlds if needed." I felt cold dread settle into my stomach. No, I don't want this for him. I want him to have a normal life. That's not your choice to make. The gift skips generations sometimes, but it always returns. All you can do is teach him what you know, prepare him for what might come, and trust him to make his own choices when the time comes. I drove home that day, feeling heavier than when I'd arrived. The thought of Michael inheriting this burden, of him someday standing at a thin place and making impossible choices, was almost unbearable. But Daniel was right. It wasn't my choice to make. All I could do was be present, be honest, and hope that the sacrifices we'd made would be enough to spare him the worst of it. Michael was 8 years old then, bright and curious and already asking questions about tribal history and sacred sites. I started teaching him what I could, carefully, without revealing the full weight of what I knew. I taught him about the ceremonial grounds, about the importance of respecting thin places, about the responsibility that came with being part of the Runs with Horses lineage. He absorbed it all with the seriousness of a child who understands that some knowledge is sacred. And sometimes, when we drove past mile marker 32, I'd see him staring out the window at nothing, and I'd wonder if he could see the figures too, if the gift was already awakening in him. The years passed. 2017, 2018, 2019. I continued my work with the tribal police, patrolling the same roads, responding to the same types of calls. The pipeline was eventually completed through a different route. The camps disbanded. Life on Standing Rock returned to its usual rhythm, changed but not destroyed. I carried the memories of the 8 timelines, using them to make better decisions, to understand consequences before they unfolded. It was useful, being able to see the paths not taken, but it was also exhausting. Every choice carried the weight of 8 different outcomes, and sometimes I couldn't remember which one belonged to this timeline. Skylar noticed the changes in me, but she never pushed for explanations I couldn't give. She just held my hand on quiet evenings, anchored me when I drifted too far into memories of other lives, reminded me that this life, this moment, this timeline was the one that mattered. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and Standing Rock, like everywhere else, struggled with lockdowns and sickness, and the impossible task of protecting vulnerable elders from an invisible enemy. I worked through it, enforcing regulations I didn't always agree with, trying to balance public health with personal freedom, watching people die who might have lived if we'd made different choices. And through it all, I carried the knowledge that in some other timeline, some version of me had made different choices and seen different outcomes. That knowledge didn't make the losses easier, but it did help me understand that we'd done our best with the information we had. By 2025, I was approaching 50. Michael was almost 17, nearly the age I'd been when I'd supposedly first set up the checkpoint in 1996. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, deeply connected to his culture, passionate about protecting sacred sites and water rights. He talked about joining the tribal police when he graduated, following in my footsteps. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Pride, certainly, but also fear. Fear that the burden would pass to him, that he'd end up standing at a thin place making impossible choices, sacrificing pieces of himself to heal wounds in reality. But those were worries for another day. For now, I had a more immediate concern. October 27th, 2026 was approaching, the 10-year anniversary of the checkpoint ceremony, the day the first merge was supposed to happen. I'd been dreading it and anticipating it in equal measure. Part of me wanted to reclaim that lost piece of myself, to feel whole again. But part of me was terrified of what the merging would feel like, whether I'd still be me afterward, or if I'd become something else. As the date approached, I found myself driving to mile marker 32 more often. The 7 figures were still there, still holding their vigil, but I noticed subtle changes. The youngest one, 1976 me, seemed brighter somehow, more solid, like he was preparing to leave the circle, to return to me. On October 26th, the day before the merging, I took Michael with me. He was old enough now, almost an adult. He deserved to know the truth. We drove to mile marker 32 in silence. When we arrived, I parked on the shoulder, and we both got out. Michael looked around, taking in the empty prairie, the endless sky, the unremarkable stretch of highway. "What are we doing here, Dad?" "I need to show you something. Something I've been carrying for 10 years. Something that might be yours to carry someday." I told him everything. About the checkpoint, the loops, the 8 versions of myself. About the ceremony, the sacrifice, the 7 who'd stayed so one could leave. About the merging that was supposed to happen tomorrow. He listened without interrupting, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally, acceptance. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Can I see them?" he asked finally. "The other versions of you?" "I don't know. Not everyone can. But try." He looked at the spot where the circle stood. At first, I thought he couldn't see them, but then his eyes widened, and I knew. "There are 7 of them," he whispered, 7 men standing in a circle. "They look like you, but different ages. You can see them." "Yeah, I can see them." He turned to me, his eyes full of questions. "Does this mean I'll have to do this someday? Stand in a circle and sacrifice myself?" "I don't know. I hope not. But if you do, know that it's a choice. You can always walk away. The burden doesn't have to be yours." "But it was yours. You chose to stay and seal the threshold." "We all did. All 8 of us." "Then, if I have to make that choice someday, I'll make it the same way. Because that's what our family does. We hold the boundaries. We protect the thin places." He looked back at the 7 figures. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Of all of you." I felt something break open in my chest, some dam I'd been holding against the weight of the sacrifice, and for the first time in 10 years, I cried. Not from grief or loss, but from pride. My son understood. He saw what we'd done and why, and he honored it. We stood there together as the sun set, father and son, looking at the ghosts of choices made and sacrifices offered. And I knew that whatever came tomorrow, whatever the merging brought, I wouldn't face it alone. October 27th, 2026 dawned cold and clear. I woke early, before Skylar and Michael, and drove to mile marker 32. I wanted to be there when it happened, whatever it turned out to be. I parked and walked to the circle. The 7 figures were there, but as I watched, one of them, the youngest, began to move. For the first time in 10 years, he broke the circle and walked toward me. He looked so young, 22, 23 maybe. Just a kid, really, wearing the uniform of a rookie cop, carrying the weight of a burden he'd barely understood when he'd accepted it. He stopped a few feet away, and we looked at each other across a decade of experience and sacrifice. "Hello," I said. "Hello," he replied. His voice was my voice, but younger, less worn. "Are you ready?" "I don't know. What happens now?" "I merge with you. My experiences, my memories, my essence becomes part of you. And the part of me that's been anchored here, holding the threshold, it releases. I get to rest. Will it hurt? I don't think so. It's more like coming home after a very long journey." He reached out his hand. I took it, and I remembered. Not just intellectually, not just as stories told or timelines observed, but as lived experience. I remembered being 22 years old, fresh out of the academy, setting up my first checkpoint on Highway 1806. I remembered the confusion when James Whitehorse started looping. I remembered meeting the older versions of myself, learning about the threshold, making the choice to stand in the circle. I remembered 50 years of holding that position, of watching time flow past while I stood frozen, of seeing people drive by and never knowing I was there, of feeling the weight of the seal pressing down on me for decades. And then I remembered releasing it, walking forward, returning home to myself. The merge was complete. The youngest version of me was no longer standing at the threshold. He was inside me, integrated, whole. I opened my eyes and saw that only 6 figures remained in the circle. The gap where 1976 me had stood was now filled by nothing but prairie wind. I felt different, fuller, like a piece of me that had been missing for 10 years had finally returned. But I also felt the weight of 50 years of anchoring, the exhaustion of holding a boundary for half a century. I was more now, more experienced, more tired, more complete, but also more fractured, because I now carried the lived experience of being in two places at once for 50 years. It would take time to integrate these new memories, to understand what it meant to be more fully myself. But I had time. 10 more years until the next merge, 20 until the one after that. By 2046, I'd be whole again, all 8 versions integrated, all the sacrifices acknowledged, all the debts paid. I got back in my vehicle and drove home as the sun rose over Standing Rock. Skylar was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in. She took one look at me and knew something had changed. "It happened," she said. "Yeah, the first one came home. How do you feel?" I thought about it. Fuller, heavier, like I'm carrying more than I did yesterday, but in a good way. Like I'm more me than I was before. She kissed my forehead. "Welcome home. All of you." Michael came downstairs a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked at me, and I saw recognition in his gaze. He knew. He could see the change. "Did it work?" he asked. "Yeah, 6 more to go. We'll get through them together," he said. And we did. Every 10 years, on October 27th, another version of me would break from the circle and merge back. Each time, I became more complete, but also more complex. More memories, more experiences, more understanding of the cost of the choices we make. By 2046, when the last merge happened, I was an old man of 76. Michael was 42, with kids of his own. Skylar was still by my side, grayer and slower, but no less fierce. On that October morning, I drove to mile marker 32 one final time. Only one figure remained in the circle, the oldest version of me, the one from 2046 who'd lived through all the loops, who'd carried the burden the longest, who'd seen the most, and sacrificed the most. He walked toward me, this ancient version of myself, and I saw in his eyes the wisdom of 100 years compressed into 70. "Hello, old friend," I said. "Hello, young man," he replied, smiling. "Ready to be complete?" "More than ready." We merged, and I felt the final piece of myself return home. All the experiences, all the memories, all the timelines collapsing into one integrated whole. I was Thomas Runs with Horses, not 8 versions but one, carrying the wisdom of 8 lifetimes, the sacrifices of 7 selves, the weight of 70 years of holding the boundary. The circle was empty now. The threshold was permanently sealed. The debt was paid. I drove home through the October morning, feeling the weight lift even as new understanding settled in its place. We'd done it. All of us. We'd healed a wound in reality, freed those trapped in temporal loops, and paid the price without complaint. And now, finally, after 30 years, I could rest. Not the rest of death, but the rest of completion. The knowledge that the burden had been carried, the sacrifice honored, the threshold healed. I pulled into my driveway and saw my family waiting on the porch. Skylar, Michael, my grandchildren. 3 generations of Runs with Horses standing together, anchored in this timeline, in this moment. I got out of the vehicle and walked toward them, feeling more whole than I'd felt in 30 years. "It's done," I said, and Skylar, who'd waited 30 years for me to be complete, who'd loved all 8 versions of me without fully understanding what that meant, smiled. "Welcome home, Thomas. All of you, welcome home."